On the morning of April 3, 1934, the fog lay over the Irish Sea like a lid. The village of Dunmore Hollow woke to bells and a rumor. The coastal fishing sloop, SS Caligo, had been found drifting, her name scarred from the stern, her wheel lashed, and no soul aboard. The tide had left her on a hummock of black kelp 3 miles from the old lighthouse at Wicklow Head. The sea took many things, but it usually kept its dead. This one kept its silence. Captain Elias Hartwell was the last man known to have spoken to the Caligo. He lodged his complaint at the port and drew a map in a tavern by the candlelight, an erratic scrawl that ended at a place the locals called the Silent Abyss, a narrow trough in the continental shelf where nets came back shredded and compasses slipped. Hartwell's handwriting trembled when he wrote the coordinates: 52 degrees 40 minutes north, 6 degrees 0 minutes west. He muttered a name he said he'd heard over the wind: Nocturne. When the commissioners of maritime inquiry arrived on the 22nd, they brought men in sober coats, bound ledgers, and plain white masks. It was said later, by those too old to forget, that the masks were not for the men's faces, but for what their eyes might see. The men in masks moved through Dunmore Hollow like harvesters. They asked questions in clipped tones about ships, lights seen at sea, and children who walked after midnight. It was a child who first broke their polite interrogation. Little Maeve O'Connor, 7 years old, led the masked men to an abandoned boathouse under the cliffs. She clutched a torn scrap of canvas to her chest. On it, a small pencil drawing showed a tall ship with hollow windows and no crew, only small faceless figures on the deck, hands raised. Above them, in childish block letters, Maeve had written another set of coordinates and a date: 14 October, 1723. The boathouse yielded fragments: a rusted sextant stamped Hartwell & Sons, an oilskin jacket with the crest of a shipping company long dissolved, and a journal sealed in tarred leather. The journal belonged to Samuel O'Rourke, the Caligo's first mate. His entry stopped on April 1, 1934, mid-sentence, when the ink smeared as if someone had tried and failed to finish a thought. In the margins were cramped notations in a stranger's hand. "They hear us. The children answer." Beneath that, a smear like a thumbprint in dried salt. The inquiry's men escorted the Caligo's hulk into port and set to searching her hull. Inside, they found an impossible order: toys laid meticulously in a circle on the galley floor, a child's shoe tucked under the captain's bunk, and on the bulkhead a map painted in blood-red pigment, old, with names that did not belong to any chart. One corner read, "Project Nocturne, Confidential, 1929. The ledger in the commissioner's briefcase contained only 3 words in neat script: "Do not sound below." The village whispered of a clandestine operation that once employed men from the Admiralty to probe the deep places, devices that listened to the bottom of the sea, instruments that could coax from the abyss a hum not of wind, but of something else. They called it an experiment in silence. Draw sound from the deep and learn which silence it belonged to. Old men at the quay remembered a visit in 1929 by dark-suited engineers who paid in coin and asked for quiet rooms and children's lullabies. They left behind bolts of cloth and a ledger stamped with the letters MIB, an acronym that was never to appear in any public record. The commission found the ledger, and they sealed it. They filed a report with clinical phrases: unaccounted absence of crew, possible mass abduction, inconclusive evidence, and they left Dunmore Hollow on a grey ferry without raising the questions Maeve's drawing had posed. Those who had handled the journal reported strange dreams, rooms filled with children who hummed beneath the floor, a pressure on the chest like the deep pressing against glass. Some men in the commission took to sleeping with lamps lit, others could not sleep at all. A clerk named Harrington tore his hair and vanished one night, leaving his ledger open to a single sentence: "They answered my name, and the sea did not return it." In the weeks that followed, more oddities turned up along the Wicklow shore. Nets snagged on shapes that could not be lifted. Fishermen's dogs refused to go near certain rocks at low tide. Once, at dawn, a masked figure was seen kneeling on the cliff, turning his face to the water and unscrewing a small brass instrument that sang with a frequency so low the gulls fell silent. When the men cornered him, he dropped the instrument and spat in an odd tongue. His mask had no eyes painted on it. Beneath the hood, his skin had been scarred in a neat ring around his mouth, as though kissing salt for years had worn grooves. He sang nothing afterward. On the eve of June 12, a farmer found a circle of small white stones on the strand, arranged around a child's red ribbon. When the masked men came to take measurements, they found the ribbon threaded with a thin black hair that had been braided into a rope. The hair was not human, or so said the surgeon, too coarse, too cold to be of any living person. The hair was placed into the commission's evidence chest and later declared lost. The local priest, Father Malachi, kept a ledger of his own. He recorded people coming to him in the night, saying that they had heard voices from the cliff caverns, whispers like many children speaking through one throat. He wrote down one phrase repeated by a dozen frightened tongues: "Do not call the name in daylight." He wrote later that someone had scratched his church door with a compass point so deep it had bled seawater. The more the inquiry probed, the more the sea seemed to move just out of reach. A diver sent to inspect the Caligo's keel surfaced with a mania. He spoke of a cavern beneath the trough where a pale city with windows like mouths lay, and figures pacing the terraces who wore faces like the backsides of moons. He drew a map in the margins of his notebook, and on the map he placed a mark, a small black dot labeled simply "Door." The diver's wife found him days later, staring at the sea with salt crusted in his beard, singing lullabies in a language he had not known. When they tried to read his notebook, the ink had bled into unreadable loops. The children of the town began to vanish in the way fog takes a path, slowly, then all at once. Not all were taken. Some returned changed, with their mouths sealed with a thin white wax, and their eyes empty, humming a melody that seemed to raise the hair on one's neck. Those who returned could not remember the path they had walked. They only said when pressed that they had been invited by the good merchant and had followed the sound like a promise. The good merchant was never seen, save for footprints of long narrow boots leading to the edge of the water where the sand had been scoured smooth. In October, the commission ordered the Caligo to be towed to a dry dock for forensic examination. The town watched as the ship's shadow stretched across the mudflats like an accusation. The keel held a surprise. Beneath a sealed hatch, carved into the timbers, someone had etched a dozen names, some scratched as if by a child's nail, others engraved with the confidence of an adult hand. Among them was a name known to every villager, a name that belonged to no ship's manifest: Maeve O'Connor. Beneath the names, a verse in Gaelic read, "Ni Philamid, we do not return." Men in the commission argued that the ship had been scavenged by opportunists, that folk superstition had embroidered misfortune into pattern. They burned what few smudged maps they could find. Yet some things